The auction block. Rain hammers the auction yard as Lena Hart stumbles onto the wooden platform, still bleeding from childbirth hours before. Her newborn daughter screams against her chest, tiny fists flailing. Below, men in mud-caked boots shout numbers like she's livestock. $50, $75, $100. The auctioneer's gavel hovers. Then a voice cuts through the storm, low, steady, final. $200. The crowd goes silent. A tall rancher steps forward, gray eyes locked on hers. The gavel slams. Sold. If you want to see how far a woman can rise from her lowest moment, stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. The rain came down in sheets that turned the Wyoming Territory auction yard into a sea of churning mud. Lena Hart's bare feet slipped on the wooden platform as rough hands shoved her forward, the chains at her wrists rattling like some grotesque announcement of her arrival. She clutched the bundle against her chest. Her daughter, born less than 3 hours ago in the back of a wagon, still slick with birth and wailing with the fierce cry of new life. Blood soaked through the thin cotton dress they'd thrown over her. It ran in dark rivulets down her legs, mixing with rainwater and dripping onto the auction block. She swayed, vision tunneling, but she didn't fall. Couldn't fall. Not with the baby in her arms. "Lot 47, the auctioneer barked, his voice cutting through the drumming rain. He was a fat man with a cigar clenched between yellow teeth, standing under a makeshift canopy while everyone else drowned. "Female, 22 years. Healthy stock despite recent delivery." He waved a dismissive hand at the baby. "Comes with offspring. Bid starts at $25. The men below shifted in the mud, their eyes crawling over her like insects. Lena had learned not to look at their faces, learned that meeting a man's gaze in a place like this was an invitation for things worse than being sold. "25, someone called from the back. A tobacco-stained rancher with hands like ham hocks. "30, came another voice. The baby's cries grew more desperate. Lena tried to rock her, tried to offer comfort with trembling arms while her own body screamed in pain. The afterbirth hadn't come yet. She could feel it inside her, wrong and dangerous. But there was no midwife here, no doctor, no one who cared whether she lived or died, so long as she fetched a price first. 40, a younger man shouted. He had mean eyes and a scar that split his lip. Lena's knees buckled. She caught herself against the post they'd chained her to, iron biting into her wrists. The world tilted sickeningly. How had she gotten here? 6 months ago, she'd been a school teacher in Pennsylvania, engaged to a banker's son. Then the fever took her parents. The debts came. The banker's son vanished, and the men with legal papers appeared, claiming her father had signed something years ago, a contract, a promise, a lie that somehow made her property. They'd shipped her west in a cattle car with 12 other women. Most were younger. All were terrified. By the time they reached the territories, 3 had disappeared in the night. No one asked where. 50, the tobacco rancher called again. The auctioneer grinned, cigar bobbing. Now we're talking. Do I hear 60? 75. The man with the scarred lip stepped closer to the platform, squinting up at her through the rain. She's scrawny, but she'll do for kitchen work. And the brat? The child, Lena heard herself say. Her voice came out raw, barely above a whisper. Her name is Hope. The crowd laughed. It was an ugly sound, like crows fighting over carrion. Hope! The scarred man slapped his knee. You hear that, boys? The merchandise has opinions. He turned back to the auctioneer. 75 is my offer. Take it or leave it. The auctioneer raised his gavel. 75 going once. 100. The new voice came from somewhere at the back of the crowd, deeper in the rain. Lena couldn't see who spoke. The men turned, craning their necks. $100, the voice repeated, and now she caught a glimpse of him, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing a weather-beaten duster that hung to his knees. A wide-brimmed hat shadowed his face. And I want the legal papers, both of them, mother and child. The auctioneer's grin widened. Well now, that's a serious bid. Do I hear? 120, the scarred man snarled. He was staring at the newcomer with open hostility. Lena felt Hope's tiny body shuddering against her chest. The baby's cries had weakened to exhausted whimpers. She needed to be warm, dry. Federal and Lena had nothing to give her, not even milk yet. Her body was too shocked, too broken. 120 going once, the auctioneer sang out. The tall man stepped forward through the mud, and Lena finally saw his face. Mid-30s, she guessed. Strong jaw, dark with several days' stubble. Eyes the color of storm clouds, fixed on her with an expression she couldn't read. Not hunger like the others. Something different. Something that made her chest tighten with a feeling she didn't trust. 150, he said quietly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. That was real money. Money that could buy good horses, winter supplies, land. The scarred man spat into the mud. You're crazy, Rourke. She's half dead already. And that baby, 200. The man named Rourke didn't raise his voice. Didn't need to. The words fell like stones into still water. Final offer, cash. The auction yard went silent except for the rain. Even the auctioneer seemed stunned. He recovered quickly, greed lighting his piggy eyes. $200, going once, going twice. The gavel rose high. Sold, to Caleb Rourke. The world lurched. Lena felt hands, new hands, different hands, unlocking the chains at her wrists. She nearly fell, but someone caught her elbow, not roughly, almost gently. Easy now. It was him, Rourke. Up close she could see the lines around his eyes, the silver threading through dark hair at his temples. He smelled like leather and pine and something clean that cut through the stench of the auction yard. Can you walk? Could she? Lena wasn't sure. Her legs felt like water. Blood still ran hot down her thighs. But she nodded because the alternative was being carried, and she'd endured enough indignity for one lifetime. The shackles, Rourke said, not to her. His voice hardened. Take them off, now. Sir, we generally... Now. The iron cuffs fell away. Lena's wrists were raw underneath, ringed with bruises and cuts. She pulled Hope closer, trying to shield her daughter from the rain. Rourke shrugged out of his duster and held it out. For the baby. Lena stared at the coat. It was a trick. Had to be. Men didn't offer kindness without expecting payment. She'd learned that in the cattle car, learned it in a dozen small cruelties on the journey west. Take it, Rourke said. His voice was quieter now. She's cold. Hope was cold, shaking with it. Lena's hands moved before her mind could catch up, wrapping the heavy coat around her daughter. The baby's cries softened almost immediately, muffled by wool and warmth. Thank you, Lena whispered. The words felt strange in her mouth. Rourke nodded once. I have a wagon. This way. He started walking. Lena followed because she had no choice, her feet sucking through mud, every step sending fresh waves of pain through her ravaged body. Around them, the crowd was already dispersing, moving on to the next lot. Another woman was being dragged onto the platform. Younger, 16 maybe. Sobbing. Lena looked away, looked at the back of Caleb Rourke's head instead, at the way rain ran off his hat brim in steady streams. He'd paid $200. $200. What did he want? What would he demand in return? The wagon stood at the edge of the yard, a sturdy, covered rig with two horses stamping impatiently in the downpour. Rourke pulled back the canvas. Get in. There's blankets. Lena hesitated. Getting in that wagon meant what? Going somewhere unknown with a stranger who'd bought her like livestock. But staying meant the auction yard, the mud, the men with their crawling eyes. She climbed in. The wagon bed was clean, lined with straw and several thick wool blankets. Lena sank onto them, her body screaming with relief at being horizontal. She unwrapped Hope just enough to check her, still breathing, still whole, her tiny face scrunched in furious protest at being born into this cold, wet world. Rourke appeared at the back of the wagon, holding papers in a waxed envelope. The deed of sale, he said. Your freedom papers, too, once we get to a magistrate. And the baby's birth record. Why? The question escaped before Lena could stop it. Rourke's expression didn't change. Because you're people, not property. He started to turn away, then paused. There's water in the canteen. Drink. You've lost blood. He disappeared before she could respond. A moment later, the wagon lurched into motion. wheels creaking. Lena fumbled for the canteen with shaking hands and drank. The water was clean and cold and tasted like salvation. Hope began to wail again, that desperate, hungry cry that made Lena's useless breasts ache. Shh, baby, shh. She tried rocking, tried humming, tried everything she could think of, but the crying only intensified. The wagon stopped. Footsteps approached. Lena tensed as Rourke pulled back the canvas again. The baby? She's hungry. Lena heard the defeat in her own voice. But I don't have goat's milk. Rourke held up a small bottle. It's not ideal, but it'll keep her alive until your milk comes in. May I? Lena nodded, too exhausted to question this strange kindness. Rourke climbed into the wagon with surprising care for such a large man, settling cross-legged near her feet. He tested the milk temperature on his wrist like he'd done this before, then offered the bottle to Hope. The baby latched on immediately, drinking with desperate gulps. She's a fighter, Rourke observed. She's stubborn. Lena managed the ghost of a smile. Came into the world screaming and hasn't stopped since? Stubborn's good. Out here, stubborn keeps you breathing. They sat in silence, broken only by Hope's feeding sounds, and the rain hammering the canvas above. Lena studied Rourke in the dim light filtering through. His hands were scarred and calloused, but gentle on the bottle. His shoulders were tense, like he was ready to bolt at any moment. Why did you buy me? The question came out steadier this time. Rourke didn't look up from Hope. Saw you on the platform. Saw what they were doing. Couldn't walk away. That's not an answer. It's the only one I have. Now he did meet her eyes. I'm not good at this. Talking, explaining, but I don't believe in what happened back there. Don't believe people should be sold. My father. He stopped abruptly, shook his head. Doesn't matter. Point is, you're not a slave. Soon as we reach town, I'll file the papers. You'll be free to go wherever you want. With what money? Lena heard the bitterness creep in. With a newborn and no prospects and blood still running down my legs? Rourke flinched. The bleeding's not stopping? I don't know. I don't think so. Everything hurts. He was quiet for a long moment, jaw working. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. There's a doctor in Canyon Bend. 3 hours if we push. Can you make it? Could she? Lena wasn't sure. She was so tired, so cold despite the blankets, and something felt wrong inside her, something beyond normal pain. I'll try, she whispered. Rourke nodded. He finished feeding Hope, who had fallen into milk-drunk sleep against his large hand. He passed the baby back to Lena with unexpected gentleness. Keep her warm. I'm going to drive hard. If you need me to stop, you shout. Understand? Yes. Good. He started to leave, then turned back one more time. What's your name? Your real name? Lena Hart. Lena. He tested it, like he was learning a new word. I'm Caleb Rourke, and I promise you, whatever happens, nobody's going to hurt you again, not while I'm breathing. Then he was gone, and the wagon was moving again, faster now, jarring over rough terrain. Lena held Hope close and tried not to think about what promises meant, tried not to remember all the promises that had been broken before. But despite everything, the pain, the fear, the bone-deep exhaustion, something small and fragile unfurled in her chest. Not trust, not yet, but maybe the faintest possibility of hope. The wagon hit a rut, and Lena gasped as pain lanced through her abdomen. Fresh blood, too much blood, soaking through her dress. Hope stirred against her chest, making small mewling sounds. Caleb! The name came out weak. She tried again, louder. Caleb! The wagon stopped so fast she nearly rolled forward. Footsteps, running. Then Caleb was there, his face appearing in the dim interior. What's wrong? The bleeding. Lena's vision swam. Something's wrong. I can feel it. Caleb's expression went hard and focused. He climbed fully into the wagon, pulling the canvas shut behind him. I need to check. Is that... Can I... Yes. What choice was there? Die of modesty or let him help? Caleb moved with quick efficiency, pushing aside blankets. his hand steady even as his jaw clenched at what he saw. The afterbirth, he said quietly. It hasn't delivered. That's what's causing the bleeding. Lena's head swam. She'd heard of women dying this way, bleeding out hours after birth because something went wrong, something stayed inside that shouldn't. Can you fix it? Her voice sounded very small. Caleb met her eyes. I've delivered foals, calves, never a human baby, but the principle's the same. I can try, but it's going to hurt. Everything already hurts. It's going to hurt worse. Lena looked down at Hope's sleeping face, so small and perfect and new. Do it. What followed was pain beyond anything Lena had known. Worse than labor. Worse than the chains. Caleb worked with grim determination, his face pale, but his hands sure, and Lena bit down on a leather strap to keep from screaming. She didn't want to wake Hope, didn't want her daughter's first memories to be her mother's agony. Almost, Caleb said through gritted teeth. Almost there. Something shifted inside her. Something came free. The relief was so sudden Lena actually sobbed. Got it. Caleb's shoulders sagged. He pulled back, wrapping the afterbirth in cloth without looking at it. The bleeding should slow now. Should. He reached for clean blankets, pressing them against her. Hold these. Firm pressure. Lena obeyed, her hands shaking. Caleb moved around the wagon, cleaning up with methodical care. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. The set of his shoulders said everything, the weight of what he'd just done, the intimacy of it, the terrible vulnerability they'd both endured. When he was finished, he sat back against the wagon side, running a hand over his face. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I'm sorry you went through that. You saved my life. I bought you at an auction. His voice was flat. That's not something to be proud of. But you're here now. You could have just left me to die. No. The word came out hard. I couldn't then, and I can't now, and I don't really want to talk about why, because talking won't change what happened to you or what's happening to a dozen other women right now at that yard. He stood abruptly. I'm going to get us to Canyon Bend. You rest. He left before Lena could respond. The wagon started moving again, this time at a steadier pace. Lena arranged the blankets around herself in hope, her body finally beginning to feel something other than pain. Exhaustion crept in. Her eyelids grew heavy. She fought it at first. Sleep felt like surrender, like dropping her guard in hostile territory. But hope was warm and safe against her chest, and the bleeding had indeed slowed to a trickle, and Caleb Rourke had just saved her life with his own scarred hands without asking for anything in return. Maybe, just maybe, she could close her eyes. Just for a moment. When Lena woke, the rain had stopped and gray daylight filtered through the canvas. The wagon was still. She sat up slowly, every muscle protesting, and found herself in a barn. A clean barn with fresh hay and the warm smell of horses. Caleb appeared carrying a steaming pot. You're awake. Where are we? My place. Rocking our ranch. We're about an hour outside Canyon Bend. He set the pot down, soup by the smell of it. You slept through the night. So did she. He nodded at Hope, still nestled in blankets. Lena blinked. An entire night? She'd been unconscious for hours in a stranger's wagon, and nothing bad had happened? Caleb seemed to read her thoughts. You were safe. I slept in the house. He gestured vaguely toward a structure Lena couldn't see from inside the barn. There's food, clean clothes that might fit, left over from... He paused. From before. And I've drawn water for washing, if you're strong enough. I can manage. Lena started to stand, then swayed. Caleb caught her elbow. Easy. You lost a lot of blood. Your body needs time. I don't have time. The words came out sharper than intended. I have a daughter who needs me. I can't afford to be weak. Being hurt doesn't make you weak. Caleb's voice was quiet but firm. It makes you human. And humans need rest to heal. Lena wanted to argue, wanted to prove she was strong enough to stand on her own, but her legs were shaking and her head spun, and hope was starting to fuss, tiny sounds that would build to wails soon enough. Let me help. Caleb's hand was still on her elbow, steady and warm. Just for now. Just until you can stand on your own. There was something in his tone, something that said he understood what it cost to accept help, to admit need. Lena found herself nodding. Between the two of them, they got Lena cleaned and dressed in a simple calico dress that fit surprisingly well. They got Hope fed and changed, and they sat in the barn's morning light eating soup while the horses nickered softly in their stalls. "The woman who owned that dress," Lena said eventually. "Who was she?" Caleb's spoon paused halfway to his mouth. "My wife, Sarah. She died 3 years ago. Influenza." "I'm sorry." "So am I." He set the spoon down. "She was good, kind, would have liked you, I think. Would have been first in line to help a woman in trouble." "Is that why you bought me? Because of her?" "Maybe partly." Caleb stared into his soup. "Or maybe I'm just tired of watching the world be cruel and doing nothing about it. My father owned slaves before the war. I grew up seeing what that did to people. The ones in chains and the ones holding the chains swore I'd never be part of it." He looked up at her. "When I saw you on that platform, bleeding and holding your baby, I couldn't walk away. Would have been the same as putting the chains on myself." Lena absorbed this. "So what happens now?" "Now we get you strong enough to travel. Then we go to Canyon Bend, file the freedom papers, and you decide what you want to do next. If you want to stay in the territory, I can help you find work. If you want to go back east, I'll pay for passage. Your choice." "Just like that?" "Just like that." Lena studied him, this strange, quiet man who'd upended her world in the space of a day. He met her gaze steadily, no hidden agenda in his storm-gray eyes. Just honesty. "What if I wanted to stay here?" The question surprised her as much as it did him. "Just for a while. Until I figure things out." Caleb was quiet for a long moment. "The ranch is big." "There's a spare room in the house. I'm gone most days, working the herd. You'd have space, privacy, and—" He hesitated. "I could use help with the books, the accounting. Sarah used to handle it, and I've been making a mess of it ever since. I can do numbers." Lena felt something unfamiliar stirring in her chest. "I was a school teacher, before." "Then we have a deal. Room and board in exchange for keeping the ranch finances from complete disaster. And when you're ready to move on, no questions asked." He held out his hand. Lena looked at it, scarred, calloused, honest, and slowly reached out to shake. His grip was firm but careful, like he was aware of his own strength and how easily it could hurt. "Deal," Lena said. Hope chose that moment to let out a tremendous wail, shattering the quiet. They both laughed, the tension breaking like storm clouds after rain. "She's got timing," Caleb observed. "She's got lungs." Lena lifted her daughter, who immediately began rooting at her chest. I think my milk might be coming in." Caleb stood quickly, color rising in his weathered cheeks. I'll give you privacy. When you're ready, the house is just through those doors." He disappeared before Lena could respond. She settled back against the hay, arranging her dress to let Hope nurse. The baby latched on with determination, and yes, there was milk. Not much yet, but enough. Enough to keep her daughter alive another day. Through the barn doors, Lena could see a slice of landscape, rolling hills still wet from yesterday's rain, scattered pine trees, mountains in the distance. It was harsh country, unforgiving, but it was also beautiful in a way that made her throat tight. She'd been sold like livestock yesterday, had nearly died, had fallen into the hands of a stranger who could have done anything, demanded anything. Instead, he'd given her freedom, choice, a place to rest and heal. Lena looked down at Hope's tiny face, eyes closed in nursing bliss, and felt that fragile thing in her chest grow stronger. Not trust, not yet, but hope. Real, possible, dangerous hope. And for the first time since the fever took her parents, since the debts came, since rough hands dragged her onto that platform in the rain, for the first time in so very long, Lena let herself believe that maybe, just maybe, the worst was over. That maybe what came next could be something better, something worth fighting for. The first week passed in a haze of exhaustion and small miracles. Lena's body slowly remembered how to function without constant pain. Her milk came in fully on the third day, and Hope nursed with the fierce determination of someone who'd fought for every breath since entering the world. The spare room Caleb had mentioned turned out to be surprisingly comfortable. A simple bed with a patchwork quilt, a rocking chair by the window, and a small dresser that still held a few of Sarah's things. Lena didn't move them. It felt wrong somehow, like erasing a woman who'd done nothing but die too young. Caleb kept his distance, which suited them both. He left before dawn each morning, riding out to check fences or move cattle or do whatever mysterious work occupied ranchers. He returned at dusk, smelling of leather and sage, ate whatever simple dinner Lena managed to prepare, and retreated to his own room at the far end of the house. They spoke in careful pleasantries, dancing around each other like strangers sharing a stagecoach. But on the 8th day, everything shifted. Lena woke to silence, not the usual morning sounds of Caleb moving through the house, boots on floorboards, the stove being lit, just nothing. She dressed quickly, settled Hope in the wooden cradle Caleb had brought down from the attic, and went to investigate. She found him in the kitchen, slumped over the table with his head in his hands. The account books lay open in front of him, pages covered in crossed-out numbers and frustrated scrawls. "Caleb?" He looked up, and Lena was startled to see genuine defeat in his eyes. "I can't make it work. The numbers, they don't—" He gestured helplessly at the ledger. 3 months behind on the feed supplier, 2 months on the bank loan. And I just lost 6 head to mountain lions, which means less to sell come fall, which means— He stopped, jaw clenching. "I'm drowning here." Lena moved closer, studying the books over his shoulder. The columns were a disaster, additions wrong, dates out of sequence, entire transactions missing. It wasn't laziness. It was someone trying desperately to do something they had no skill for. "May I?" She reached for the ledger. Caleb pushed it toward her like it had personally offended him. "Be my guest." Lena sat down and began working through the numbers. It took an hour, maybe more, her teacher's mind finding the patterns beneath the chaos. Caleb sat across from her the whole time, silent and still, watching with an expression she couldn't decipher. Finally, Lena set down the pencil. "It's not as bad as you think." "It's not?" "The feed supplier. You've actually overpaid by $40. See here?" She turned the book around, pointing. "You recorded this payment twice. Same with the grain delivery in March. And the bank loan, you're current. You just didn't carry the balance forward correctly." Caleb stared at the numbers like they were written in a foreign language. "So I'm not about to lose the ranch?" "Not today." Lena allowed herself a small smile. "But you do need a better system, and you should probably stop trying to do this at midnight when you're exhausted." "How did you know I work on these at midnight?" "The candle wax on the pages, the way the handwriting gets worse as it goes, and the coffee stains." She gestured at the mug rings marring several entries. "You're not sleeping, are you?" Caleb looked away. "Sleep's difficult these days." There was something raw in those words, something that spoke of ghosts and empty beds and memories that wouldn't stay buried. Lena recognized it. She'd spent enough nights staring at ceilings herself. "I could help," she said quietly. "Not just once. Every week. I could keep the books properly, make sure you know where you stand. That was our deal, wasn't it?" "The deal was you'd do it when you were ready. You've been here barely over a week. You should be resting." "I've been resting and going quietly mad with nothing to do except feed Hope and stare at walls." Lena met his eyes. "Let me help. Please. I need to feel useful again." Caleb studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "All right, but we do this proper. I pay you. You're already giving me room and board, and you're giving me peace of mind that my ranch won't collapse because I can't add 2 numbers together. That's worth wages." He stood, moving to a lockbox on the high shelf. $10 a month. That's fair for bookkeeping work." "Caleb, that's too much. It's what Sarah got, and she did half the work you'll be doing to fix my mess." He set a small stack of coins on the table between them. "Take it. Build yourself a future, one where you're not dependent on anyone's charity." The money sat there like a challenge, like a bridge to something Lena hadn't dared imagine. Independence. Real independence, earned with her own skills and labor. She picked up the coins. "Thank you." Don't thank me. Just keep me from accidentally bankrupting myself. Caleb grabbed his hat from its peg. I need to ride out to the north pasture. Fence came down in last night's wind. I'll be back by supper. He was halfway to the door when Lena spoke again. Caleb, why are you really doing this? All of it. The auction. Bringing me here. The wages. What do you get out of it? He paused in the doorway, backlit by morning sun. When he turned, his expression was unreadable. Maybe I get to sleep a little better, knowing I did one decent thing in a world that's mostly indecent. That enough of a reason? Then he was gone, leaving Lena alone with the account books and questions that had no easy answers. The days fell into a rhythm after that. Lena would spend mornings with the ledgers while Hope napped, afternoons tending the garden Sarah had planted years ago, evenings cooking simple meals. Caleb worked from dawn to dusk, always quiet, always careful to give her space. They circled each other like wary animals, neither quite trusting the peace they'd found. But trust, Lena was learning, sometimes grew in silence. It was late October when the past came calling. Lena was hanging laundry behind the house, Hope bundled against her chest in a sling Caleb had fashioned from old canvas. The air smelled of coming snow, sharp and clean. She was humming, something she hadn't done since Pennsylvania, when hoofbeats echoed up the drive. 3 riders. Lena's hand stilled on the wet sheet. Caleb emerged from the barn, wiping grease from his hands. His posture changed the moment he saw them, shoulders back, weight balanced, ready. Lena had never seen him look dangerous before. She did now. The lead rider was older, maybe 60, with a silver badge pinned to his vest. A deputy. The 2 behind him were younger, harder, hands resting too casually near their guns. Caleb Rourke? The deputy's voice carried across the yard. That's right. Deputy Marshal Tom Hewitt. I'm looking for a woman. Goes by Lena Hart. Got a claim here says she's stolen property. The world tilted. Lena's vision narrowed to pinpricks. Stolen property. The words were knives. Caleb's voice came out flat and cold. Nobody on my land is stolen. Everyone here is free. That's so? Hewitt dismounted, pulling papers from his saddlebag. Because I got a writ here from Silas Crenshaw. Says he owns a woman matching her description. 22 years old, dark hair, schoolteacher background. Sold by mistake at an auction in Laramie. He wants his property returned. She was never his property. Law says different. Hewitt unfolded the papers. Got a contract signed by her father, transferring custody in exchange for debt forgiveness. All legal and proper. Lena felt ice spreading through her veins. Her father wouldn't have. Couldn't have. But she remembered those last fevered days, remembered him signing things the creditors brought, desperate and dying and not understanding what the papers said. I have papers too. Caleb's voice cut through her spiraling thoughts. Bill of sale, freedom certificate, legal transfer of custody completed at a registered auction. Auction wasn't legal if the goods were already owned. Hewitt stepped closer. Look, I don't make the laws. I just enforce them. Crenshaw's got weight in this territory. Railroad man owns half of Denver. If he says the woman's his, then she's his. Hand her over, and there's no trouble. And if I don't? The 2 younger deputies shifted in their saddles. Hands moved incrementally closer to guns. Hewitt sighed. Then there's trouble. I'd rather not have trouble today, Rourke. You seem like a reasonable man. Caleb turned and his eyes found Lena's across the yard. In that look was a question, a choice. He could fight this, could refuse, could force the issue and probably die doing it, or he could let her go. Lena's arms tightened around Hope. The baby stirred against her chest, making soft sleeping sounds. Innocent, unaware that her mother was about to be dragged back into chains. Give me a moment, Caleb said quietly, to say goodbye. Make it quick. Caleb crossed the yard in long strides. When he reached Lena, he spoke too low for the deputies to hear. I'm not letting them take you. You don't have a choice. There's always a choice. His hand moved to the small of his back, and Lena realized with shock that he was carrying a gun tucked into his belt. I can hold them off while you run. Take my horse. Head for the mountains. There's a trapper's cabin about 10 miles northeast. Caleb, no. Lena grabbed his arm. They'll kill you. Maybe. Definitely. And then what? I'm alone with a baby in the mountains with winter coming. We'd die anyway, just slower. She forced herself to breathe. If you fight, we both lose. If I don't fight, they take you back to Crenshaw. You know what men like that do to women they consider property. Caleb's voice was rough with barely contained fury. I won't let that happen. I can't. Hope began to fuss, sensing the tension. Lena rocked automatically, her mind racing. There had to be another way. Had to be something besides dying here or going back to Crenshaw or running into wilderness that would kill them just as surely. Time's up, Hewitt called. Woman comes with us. Now! Lena looked at Caleb's face, at the desperate determination there, the willingness to die for a woman he barely knew. Something cracked open in her chest. I'll go, she said. Lena, I'll go with them. But you fight this legally. Get a real lawyer. Challenge Crenshaw's claim in court. Can you do that? A court case takes months. By then I'll still be alive. And so will you. And Hope will have someone who can fight for her if I can't. Lena pressed Hope's warm weight into Caleb's arms. Keep her safe, please. Whatever happens to me, keep her safe. No, Caleb's voice broke. No, I'm not taking your baby. You already did, the moment you bought us both. Lena stepped back before she could lose her courage. Her papers say she's free. They can't touch her, but I need to know she's protected. I need to know someone will... Her voice caught. Please. Caleb looked down at Hope, at the tiny girl sleeping peacefully in his scarred hands. When he looked up again, there were tears on his weathered face. I swear it, he said hoarsely. I swear on Sarah's grave, nothing will touch her. That's enough talk. Hewitt was losing patience. Woman, now! Lena walked across the yard on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. She didn't look back at Caleb, at Hope, at the small piece of peace she'd managed to build in 8 short weeks. Looking back would break her. Hewitt produced shackles. Real shackles, iron and heavy and familiar. Hands. That's not necessary, Caleb called out, his voice dangerous. It's what Crenshaw requested. Says she's a flight risk. The metal closed around Lena's wrists with a sound that made her stomach heave. She'd thought she'd never feel this weight again, had let herself believe she was done being chained. One of the younger deputies hauled her up onto his horse, and Lena caught a glimpse of Caleb standing in the yard, Hope cradled against his chest, his free hand hovering near his gun. Every line of his body screamed that he wanted to fight, wanted to stop this. But he didn't. Because she'd asked him not to. Because keeping Hope safe mattered more than his pride or his fury. If she's harmed, Caleb said, his voice carrying across the yard, I will find Crenshaw, and I will make him regret every second of it. Hewitt swung into his saddle. That's a threat on a prominent citizen, Rourke. I'd be careful about making threats. It's not a threat. It's a promise. They rode out as the sun climbed higher, and Lena forced herself to keep her eyes forward. Forced herself not to turn and see Caleb holding her daughter, both of them getting smaller in the distance. Forced herself to believe that this wasn't the end, just another test in a life that had become nothing but tests. The ride to Crenshaw's estate took 3 days. They stopped at way stations, small towns, places where Lena was locked in storage rooms or cellars, while the deputies drank and played cards. No one spoke to her. No one explained what would happen when they arrived. She was cargo again. Merchandise being returned to its rightful owner. Silas Crenshaw's house sat on a hill overlooking Denver like a predator surveying its territory. It was massive, 3 stories of white stone with columns that belonged on a southern plantation, not a western mountainside. Lena was brought in through the servants' entrance, down corridors lined with expensive rugs and paintings, into a study that smelled of cigar smoke and old money. Crenshaw stood by the window looking out at his domain. He was smaller than Lena expected, maybe 5'8", slender, with thinning hair carefully oiled back, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than most people earned in a year. When he turned, his smile was pleasant, charming even. That made it worse somehow. Miss Hart, welcome. He gestured to a chair. Please, sit. Lena remained standing. The shackles made it awkward, but she refused to show weakness. Crenshaw's smile widened. Defiant. I like that. Shows spirit. He moved to his desk, opening a leather portfolio. I imagine you're confused, angry, perhaps, but I assure you this is all perfectly legal. Your father signed a contract. My father was dying and didn't understand what he was signing. Nevertheless, he signed, and the law is quite clear on such matters. Crenshaw pulled out a document covered in official seals. In exchange for forgiveness of his considerable debts, gambling debts primarily, though I'm sure that's painful to hear, he transferred custody of you to my organization for a period of 7 years. 7 years. The words hit like a fist. I'm not property. The courts would disagree. But let's not argue legalities. Crenshaw came around the desk, stopping just outside arm's reach. I'm a businessman, Miss Hart. I invest in assets. You represent a significant investment: transportation costs, housing, documentation. The auction was an error by an overzealous employee who's since been dismissed, but I'm willing to be reasonable. Reasonable how? Work for me? Willingly. I need someone educated, someone who can teach my household staff to read and write, manage correspondence, keep accounts. Do this well, and at the end of 7 years, you'll be free with a letter of reference and enough money to start fresh. And if I refuse? Crenshaw's pleasant expression didn't change. Then I'll exercise my legal rights to compel obedience. And I assure you, that path is far less pleasant for everyone involved. He returned to his desk. I'm offering you dignity, Miss Hart, purpose, a roof over your head, and respectable work. Most women in your position would be grateful. Most women in my position are slaves. That's an ugly word for a legal arrangement. Crenshaw's voice cooled slightly. You have until morning to decide. My housekeeper will show you to your quarters. I suggest you use the time to reflect on what's best for you and that baby you left behind. Lena's blood went cold. Hope has nothing to do with this. Doesn't she? I could make a claim there too. Child of my property, born during the contracted period. He waved a hand dismissively. But I'm not interested in infants. Too much trouble. As long as you cooperate, I have no reason to pursue that particular legal avenue. The threat hung in the air like smoke, crystal clear despite the pleasant tone. Lena understood what he was really saying. Refuse, and he'd come for Hope. Use every legal trick and political connection to take her daughter away. Maybe not today or tomorrow, but eventually. Men like Crenshaw always got what they wanted, unless someone stopped them. I need time to think, Lena said. Of course. Mrs. Brennan will show you to your room. We'll speak again at breakfast. Crenshaw smiled, all warmth and magnanimity. I'm confident we can reach an arrangement that satisfies everyone. The housekeeper, a stern woman in her 50s with iron gray hair, led Lena through a labyrinth of hallways to a small room on the 3rd floor. Servants' quarters, clean and sparse. The shackles were removed, the door locked from the outside. Lena sat on the narrow bed and let herself shake. 7 years. 7 years of being Crenshaw's educated servant, his prized asset, his legal property. 7 years of answering to a man who spoke kindly while making threats about her infant daughter. 7 years of swallowing her rage and playing grateful for the privilege of captivity. Or she could refuse, and watch him destroy Hope's future as thoroughly as he'd destroyed hers. The window looked out over Denver, gaslights beginning to glow as dusk settled, mountains dark against the horizon. Somewhere out there Caleb was holding Hope, keeping her safe, keeping his promise. Lena pressed her forehead against the cold glass and tried to remember what freedom felt like. She must have slept because morning came with harsh light and the sound of a key in the lock. Mrs. Brennan appeared with a tray, eggs, toast, coffee. Real coffee, not the bitter substitute Lena had grown used to. Eat, the housekeeper said. Mr. Crenshaw expects you at 8. Lena forced down the food. It tasted like ash. At precisely 8 o'clock, she was escorted back to the study. Crenshaw sat behind his desk, reading a newspaper. He looked up as she entered, folding the paper with crisp precision. Miss Hart, I trust you've had time to consider my offer. Lena met his eyes. I have one condition. Oh? Crenshaw looked amused. You're hardly in a position to negotiate. I work for you. Keep your accounts, teach your staff, whatever you need. But you put it in writing, legally binding writing, that you have no claim on my daughter, ever. She stays free, and when my 7 years are done, I walk away with enough money to support us both. And if I refuse? Then you get 7 years of a woman who'll fight you every single day, who'll sabotage your books, poison your staff against you, and make your life miserable in 1,000 small ways. Lena smiled without warmth. I was a teacher, Mr. Crenshaw. I know how to be patient, and I know how to make people regret underestimating me. Crenshaw studied her for a long moment. Then, surprisingly, he laughed. You have fire. I respect that. He pulled out fresh paper, dipping his pen. Very well. Your terms are acceptable. 7 years of loyal service in exchange for your freedom, a stake of $500, and legal release of any claim on your offspring. Agreed? It wasn't freedom. It wasn't even close. But it was Hope's future, Hope's safety, and sometimes that had to be enough. Agreed, Lena said. Crenshaw wrote quickly, his handwriting flowing and elegant. When he finished, he signed with a flourish, then pushed the document across the desk. Your signature, Miss Hart. Lena read every word twice, looking for traps. The language was binding. She could see that much. 7 years. $500. Legal release. It was as good as she was going to get. She signed. Excellent. Crenshaw blotted the ink, then locked the contract in his desk. Mrs. Brennan will show you your duties. I expect diligence, discretion, and absolute obedience. Disappoint me, and our agreement becomes void. Understood? Understood. Then welcome to my household, Miss Hart. I'm sure we'll work together beautifully. Lena left the study with her spine straight and her hands steady. She didn't let herself break until she was back in her small room, door locked, alone with the weight of what she'd just done. 7 years. She'd sold herself for 7 years to keep Hope safe, but as Lena pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle her sobs, she made herself a promise. 7 years wasn't forever. 7 years was survivable, and when it ended, she would find her daughter again, would build the life they both deserved. Crenshaw thought he'd won, thought he'd tamed her with contracts and threats. He had no idea what a mother's love could endure, what it could become when tested. Lena would survive this, would play the obedient servant, the grateful employee, whatever role she needed. And someday soon, she would make Silas Crenshaw regret the day he ever heard her name. The first month in Crenshaw's house taught Lena exactly what kind of man she was dealing with. He was meticulous, calculating, and utterly ruthless beneath the veneer of civility. Every morning she arrived at his study at 7 to review correspondence, reconcile accounts, and draft letters in her careful schoolteacher's hand. He never raised his voice, never had to. The threat of what he could do, what he could take, hung in the air between them like a noose. But Lena had learned something crucial during those early weeks of servitude. Crenshaw's empire was built on secrets, railroad contracts awarded through bribery, land seized from families who couldn't pay inflated debts, workers paid in scrip that kept them perpetually indebted to company stores. Every page she transcribed, every ledger she balanced, revealed another layer of corruption, and Lena remembered every word. She kept her own records, hidden in the lining of her mattress. Names, dates, amounts. Evidence written in tiny script on scraps of paper she smuggled from the trash. She didn't know what she'd do with it yet. Didn't have a plan. But knowledge was power, and she would need every scrap of power she could gather. Winter settled over Denver with brutal efficiency. Snow piled against the mansion's windows, and Lena watched from her third-floor room as the city below transformed into something almost beautiful. On clear nights, she could see the mountains, stark and white against black sky, and she wondered if Caleb was looking at the same peaks, if Hope was warm, if they remembered her. The wondering was worse than the work. Mrs. Brennan proved to be an unexpected ally, though neither of them acknowledged it directly. She would leave extra bread in Lena's room or position her for tasks that kept her away from Crenshaw's more unsavory guests. Once, when a railroad executive got drunk and tried to corner Lena in the hallway, Mrs. Brennan appeared with the poker from the fireplace and a look that could freeze blood. "Mr. Crenshaw's property is not for your entertainment," she'd said coldly. The man had left. Lena never saw him again. "Thank you," Lena had whispered. Mrs. Brennan's expression didn't soften. Don't mistake practicality for kindness. You're valuable to this household, that's all. But her eyes said something different, something that looked almost like sympathy. It was early December when everything began to unravel. Lena was working in the study, copying a contract that made her stomach turn, seizure of a widow's ranch for failure to pay taxes that had mysteriously tripled overnight, when raised voices echoed from the parlor below. She recognized Crenshaw's smooth tone, but the other voice was unfamiliar, rough, angry. "You promised me fair compensation," the stranger was saying. "You said if I testified about the property boundaries, I'd get my share. And you will, when the transaction is complete. That was 6 months ago. I got nothing but lies and excuses while you got richer off land that should have been mine." Lena moved closer to the door, careful to keep her footsteps silent. Through the gap, she could see Crenshaw standing by the fireplace, unruffled despite the other man's fury. "I suggest you lower your voice, Mr. Dalton. We can discuss this like civilized men." "Civilized?" Dalton laughed bitterly. "You wouldn't know civilized if it bit you. I know what you did. How you forged those surveys, how you paid the judge to rule in your favor. I got proof." The temperature in the room seemed to drop. Crenshaw's pleasant expression never wavered, but something in his posture changed, became predatory. "Proof is a dangerous thing to claim," he said softly, "especially when one has no allies and considerable debts. I ain't afraid of you. Perhaps you should be." The threat was naked now, stripped of pretense. Lena watched as two of Crenshaw's men, the ones he called security, but who looked more like hired thugs, materialized from the shadows. Dalton saw them too. His bluster collapsed. "I just want what's owed to me," he said, but the fight had drained from his voice. "Of course you do. And I'm a reasonable man." Crenshaw gestured to his desk. "Let's settle this properly. Put your claim in writing, and I'll have my lawyers review it." Dalton hesitated, clearly understanding this was a trap, but too desperate to refuse. He moved to the desk. Crenshaw followed, and as he passed, his eyes flicked upward, directly to where Lena stood. She froze. Had he seen her? Known she was listening? Crenshaw's smile never faltered, but there was a warning in his gaze. A reminder that nothing in this house escaped his notice. Lena retreated to the study, heart hammering. She returned to copying the contract with shaking hands, but her mind was racing. Dalton had mentioned proof, documents showing Crenshaw's fraud. If that proof existed, if she could find it? 3 days later, Dalton's body was found in an alley downtown. Robbery, the police said. Tragic accident. No one seemed to question why a man with no money would be killed for his empty pockets, except Lena knew. And now Crenshaw knew that she knew. That evening, he summoned her to his study after dinner. She entered with her spine straight, refusing to show the fear crawling up her throat. "Miss Hart, please, sit." She sat. Crenshaw poured 2 glasses of brandy, offering one. Lena declined. He shrugged and drank both, taking his time. "You've been with us nearly 2 months now," he said finally. "Your work is exemplary. The staff speaks well of you. I'm quite pleased with our arrangement." "Thank you, sir. However," he set down his glass with precise care, "I've noticed you take a certain interest in matters that don't concern you, lingering near doorways, asking the other servants questions about my business dealings." Lena's mouth went dry. "I apologize if I've overstepped, yet don't insult me with lies." Crenshaw's voice remained pleasant, which made it more terrifying. "You're intelligent, curious. Those are admirable qualities in an employee, but they can also be dangerous." He leaned forward. "I want to be very clear about something, Miss Hart. Your contract binds you to me for 7 years. During that time, you belong to me. Your labor, your time, your silence, all mine." "I understand." "Do you? Because I'm not certain you grasp the full scope of our agreement." Crenshaw pulled a newspaper from his desk drawer, unfolding it to reveal a small article. "There was an incident last week. A ranch fire outside Canyon Bend, the Rocking R, owned by a man named Caleb Rourke. The house burned to the ground. No casualties reported, but considerable damage." The world tilted. Lena gripped the arms of her chair, fighting to keep her face neutral, even as panic clawed through her chest. "I share this information," Crenshaw continued, "to illustrate a point. Your daughter is safe, for now, as long as you remain cooperative and discreet. But should you betray my trust, should you speak of things you've overheard or attempt to interfere in my affairs, well, he refolded the paper. Accidents happen, especially on isolated ranches. Lena forced herself to breathe, to think past the terror. You made that fire happen. I made nothing happen. I'm simply a businessman who's aware of certain coincidences. Crenshaw smiled. Do we understand each other now, Miss Hart? She understood perfectly. He would hurt Hope, would hurt Caleb, would burn down everything Lena cared about if she stepped out of line. Yes, sir, she whispered. We understand each other. Excellent. Then we need never speak of this again. Crenshaw stood, indicating the conversation was over. You're dismissed. Lena made it to her room before the shaking started. She pressed her fist against her mouth to muffle the sound, rage and helplessness warring in her chest. Crenshaw had just shown his hand, revealed exactly how far he would go to protect his empire, but he'd also revealed something else. He was worried. Worried enough about what she might have heard, what she might know, to threaten her, which meant his position wasn't as secure as he pretended. That night, Lena pulled out her hidden papers and studied them by candlelight. Dates, names, amounts. The pattern was clear if you knew how to look. Crenshaw was overextended. Too many projects, too many bribes, too many people he'd cheated who might eventually demand justice. His whole empire was a house of cards. And Lena was going to find the card that would make it all collapse. She just needed help, real help. Someone with power and influence who couldn't be bought or intimidated. The answer came 2 weeks later in the form of an unexpected visitor. Lena was teaching the household staff to read, part of her official duties, when Mrs. Brennan appeared in the doorway looking flustered. Miss Hart, you have a caller, in the front parlor. A caller? Lena frowned. No one knew she was here except Crenshaw's people. Says he's your legal counsel, a Mr. Harrison Webb from Canyon Bend. Lena's heart stuttered. Canyon Bend, where Caleb lived. She dismissed the class and followed Mrs. Brennan downstairs, mind racing. The man waiting in the parlor was perhaps 40, with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles and the weathered look of someone who'd spent time on the frontier. He stood when Lena entered, inclining his head politely. Miss Hart, thank you for seeing me. Mr. Webb, Lena glanced at Mrs. Brennan, who took the hint and left, closing the door behind her. I wasn't aware I had legal counsel. You do now. Mr. Caleb Rourke retained my services on your behalf. Webb pulled papers from his satchel. I filed a motion to nullify your contract with Silas Crenshaw on the grounds that it was signed under duress by your deceased father, who lacked the legal authority to transfer custody of an adult woman. Hope flared bright and painful in Lena's chest. Can you win? Honestly, it's difficult. Crenshaw has considerable influence with the territorial courts, but there are federal judges who aren't in his pocket. If we can get the case moved to federal jurisdiction, Webb met her eyes. It's a long shot, but it's a shot. How long? 6 months. Maybe more. These things take time. 6 months of living under Crenshaw's thumb. 6 months of being watched, threatened, kept away from her daughter. But at the end, possibility. What do you need from me? Lena asked. Webb leaned forward, lowering his voice. Evidence. Anything that proves Crenshaw's character and business practices. The court needs to see him for what he is, a man who traffics in human beings and calls it commerce. Can you provide that? Lena thought of the papers hidden in her mattress, the careful records she'd kept of every shady deal, every bribe, every piece of corruption she'd witnessed. Yes, she said. I can provide that. Webb's expression sharpened with something like satisfaction. Then we have a fighting chance, but Miss Hart, his voice turned serious. You need to be careful. Crenshaw is dangerous. If he suspects you're working against him, he already suspects. He's already threatened my daughter. Lena's voice hardened. But I'm tired of being afraid. Tired of men like him using my fear as a leash. So yes, I'll be careful, but I won't stop fighting. Webb studied her for a moment, then nodded slowly. Mr. Rourke said you were stronger than you looked. I'm beginning to see what he meant. How is he? The question escaped before Lena could stop it. Caleb. And Hope. They're well. The ranch house is being rebuilt. Your daughter's healthy and growing like a weed, according to Rourke's letters. Webb paused. He's very determined to get you back. I've never seen a man work so hard for someone who isn't blood. Something warm and fragile bloomed in Lena's chest. Caleb was fighting for her, building her a way out, keeping Hope safe while risking everything to challenge a man like Crenshaw. Tell him thank you, she managed. Tell him I'm fighting too. I will. Webb gathered his papers. I'll visit monthly under the guise of legal consultations regarding your contract. Crenshaw can't refuse without looking suspicious. Use that time to pass me whatever evidence you've gathered. And Miss Hart? He met her eyes. Don't lose hope. We're going to get you out of here. After Webb left, Lena returned to her room and pulled out her hidden documents. She had 6 months to build a case that would destroy Silas Crenshaw's empire. 6 months to gather enough evidence that not even his bought judges could ignore. It should have felt impossible. Instead, it felt like purpose. The work became Lena's lifeline. By day, she played the obedient servant, copying letters, balancing books, teaching staff. By night, she compiled evidence. She learned which servants hated Crenshaw enough to share information, learned which business associates felt cheated, learned the rhythms of the house well enough to move through it like a ghost. She discovered that Crenshaw kept his most sensitive documents in a safe behind a painting in his bedroom, that he met with certain business partners in secret, always after midnight, that he was planning something big, a railroad expansion that would displace entire communities, and needed it approved before anyone asked difficult questions. Lena documented everything. January became February. Webb visited monthly as promised, and each time Lena passed him new evidence. Testimonies from fired employees, copies of contracts showing fraud, lists of officials who'd received bribes. The case grew stronger with each visit, but so did the danger. Crenshaw was getting nervous. Lena could see it in the way he watched her, the questions he asked about her conversations with Webb. He knew something was wrong, but couldn't quite pin it down. His paranoia made him cruel. A maid was fired for breaking a dish. A stable hand was beaten for supposedly stealing feed. The whole household walked on eggshells. Lena kept her head down and her mouth shut. She was so close. Just a few more months. Then March arrived, and with it, disaster. Lena was crossing the hallway late one evening when she heard voices from Crenshaw's study. The door was slightly ajar, unusual since he always kept it locked during private meetings. She should have kept walking, should have gone to her room and ignored whatever was happening. But one of the voices was familiar. Webb's voice. Lena froze. Webb wasn't scheduled to visit for another 2 weeks. What was he doing here? Appreciate your cooperation, Mr. Webb, Crenshaw was saying. I know this puts you in a difficult position. You're asking me to betray my client. Webb sounded strained. To withdraw the case and destroy evidence. I'm asking you to be reasonable. Miss Hart's situation is perfectly legal. She signed a contract under duress. That's a matter of interpretation. Crenshaw's voice hardened. An interpretation depends on who's doing the interpreting. The territorial judge, for instance. The one whose daughter I'm sponsoring at finishing school back east. He interprets things very favorably for my interests. Silence. Then Webb, defeated. What exactly are you offering? $5,000? A referral to every business associate I have. And the satisfaction of knowing you made the smart choice. Crenshaw paused. Refuse, and I'll have you disbarred for ethics violations? Fabricated, of course, but convincing. Your career will be over, your family will be destitute, and Miss Hart will remain exactly where she is for the next 7 years. Lena's hands clenched against the wall. No, this couldn't be happening. Webb was their only hope, their only shot at freedom. I need time to think, Webb said quietly. You have until morning. Choose wisely, counselor. Lena fled back to her room before anyone could discover her. She paced the small space like a caged animal, mind racing. If Webb took the bribe, she was finished. The case would collapse. 6 months of work, of risk, of hope, all for nothing. Unless she did something first. The thought crystallized with sudden clarity. She couldn't wait for courts or lawyers or men to save her. She had to save herself. And she had everything she needed: evidence, knowledge, the ability to move through this house unseen. Tonight. She would do it tonight. Lena waited until the house settled into sleep, until even the servants' quarters went dark and the only sound was wind rattling the windows. Then she dressed in dark clothes, stuffed her documents inside her dress, and crept down the hallway. Crenshaw's bedroom was on the second floor, in the east wing. Lena had memorized the route months ago. She moved in stockinged feet, barely breathing, every sense alert for danger. The door was unlocked. Crenshaw's arrogance. He never imagined anyone would dare enter his private space. Lena slipped inside, easing the door shut behind her. The painting hung above the fireplace, exactly where she'd been told. Behind it, the safe. Lena lifted the frame carefully, revealing the combination lock. She'd watched Crenshaw open it once, months ago, when she'd been dusting the mantel, had memorized the sequence just in case. Her fingers trembled as she turned the dial. Left to 17, right to 34, left to 9. The safe clicked open. Inside were stacks of papers, deeds, contracts, and a leather journal. Lena grabbed everything, shoving documents into every available space in her clothing. The journal went last, tucked against her ribs. She was closing the safe when footsteps echoed in the hallway. Lena's heart stopped. She dropped behind the bed just as the door opened. Light spilled in. Crenshaw entered, carrying a lamp, still dressed despite the late hour. "I know you're here," he said calmly. "I've known for weeks that someone was in my house after dark. At first I thought it was one of the servants. Then I realized it was you." Lena pressed herself against the floor, scarcely daring to breathe. "Come out, Miss Hart. Let's discuss this like adults." She didn't move, couldn't move. Crenshaw sighed. "Very well. We'll do this the hard way." He set down the lamp and moved toward the bed. "You think you're clever. Think you can gather evidence and expose me. But you've miscalculated badly." He rounded the bed, and his eyes found her in the shadows. "There you are!" Lena bolted. She scrambled to her feet and ran for the door, but Crenshaw was faster than his slight frame suggested. He grabbed her arm, spinning her around. Documents scattered across the floor. "Let me go!" Lena struggled, kicking, fighting with everything she had. "You signed a contract," Crenshaw hissed. His pleasant mask had shattered completely, revealing the monster beneath. "You belong to me, and if you won't serve willingly, I'll make sure you serve in chains." He raised his voice. "Porter! Sanders! To my room!" Heavy footsteps thundered up the stairs. Lena knew those names, Crenshaw's enforcers, the men who'd shadowed Dalton before he died. She had seconds before they arrived. She did the only thing she could think of. She screamed. Screamed loud enough to wake the dead, loud enough to shatter the careful silence of Crenshaw's perfectly controlled house. And she kept screaming even as Crenshaw's hand clamped over her mouth, even as the enforcers burst through the door. Because Lena had learned something crucial during her months of servitude. Crenshaw's power depended on secrecy, on silence, on nobody asking questions. So she would make noise. Would make so much noise the whole world would have to listen. The enforcers grabbed her arms, but Lena kept fighting, kept struggling, kept making herself as difficult as possible. In the chaos, Crenshaw's journal fell from her dress. It landed open on the floor, pages covered in his own handwriting. Evidence of everything he'd done, everything he was. Crenshaw saw it at the same moment Lena did. His face went pale. "Get her out of here," he snapped. "Lock her in the cellar, and find that journal. Looking for this?" Everyone froze. Mrs. Brennan stood in the doorway, the journal in her weathered hands. Her face was hard as granite. "Mrs. Brennan." Crenshaw's voice regained some of its smoothness. "Give me that. Now." "I don't think so." The housekeeper held the journal like a weapon. "I've worked in this house for 15 years, cleaned your messes, kept your secrets, watched you hurt people because you could. I'm done." "You're fired." "No." Mrs. Brennan's voice was steel. "I quit, and I'm taking this journal to the federal marshal. Every page, every word, every piece of evidence that proves what you really are." Crenshaw lunged for her, but Mrs. Brennan was already moving. She disappeared into the hallway, moving with surprising speed for a woman her age. Crenshaw's men started after her, but the housekeeper's shouts had woken the entire household. Servants appeared in doorways, confused and frightened. In the confusion, Lena saw her chance. She wrenched free from the enforcer's grip and ran. Down the hallway, down the stairs, toward the front door. Behind her, Crenshaw was shouting orders, but his voice was drowned by chaos. Lena hit the front door and burst into the freezing March night. Snow crunched under her feet. She had no coat, no shoes, no plan except to get away. She ran down the long drive toward the gates, her breath coming in ragged gasps. A horse appeared in the darkness, a rider, approaching fast. Lena almost screamed before she recognized him. Caleb Rourke sat astride his horse like some frontier ghost, his face grim in the moonlight. When he saw her, relief flooded his features. Lena. He dismounted in one smooth motion, catching her before she collapsed. I've got you. How did you? Webb told me Crenshaw tried to buy him off. I rode through the night. Caleb pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shaking shoulders. You're freezing. Can you ride? Where's Hope? The question came out desperate. Is she safe? Safe with the sheriff's wife in Canyon Bend. Nobody's touching her. Caleb lifted her onto the horse, then swung up behind her. Hold on. They rode hard through the darkness, away from Crenshaw's mansion and into the mountains. Behind them, shouts echoed, torches flared. But Caleb knew these trails, and his horse was fresh. Dawn found them at a small cabin miles from any road. Caleb carried Lena inside, wrapped her in blankets, and built a fire without saying a word. When warmth finally returned to her frozen limbs, he knelt in front of her. What happened? His voice was rough. Webb said you were gathering evidence. Then Mrs. Brennan sent word that Crenshaw knew, that you were in danger. The journal, Lena interrupted. Did Mrs. Brennan make it out? Did she get away? She made it to the marshal an hour before I left town, turned over everything, the journal, documents you'd hidden with Webb, testimony from a dozen former employees. Caleb's expression was fierce with satisfaction. Federal marshals are raiding Crenshaw's house right now. They're arresting him for fraud, bribery, human trafficking. He's finished, Lena. Everything you did. It worked. The words didn't feel real, couldn't be real. Lena had spent so long fighting, surviving, enduring that victory seemed impossible. Hope, she whispered. I need to see Hope. Soon as it's safe to travel. I promise. Caleb's hand found hers, warm and solid. You did it. You saved yourself. Saved a lot of people Crenshaw would have hurt. Lena looked at their joined hands, his scarred and calloused, hers ink-stained and trembling. 7 months ago, she'd been dragged onto an auction block, had given birth in shackles, had been sold like property. Now she was free, really, truly free. And sitting beside her was the man who'd given her the first chance, who'd kept fighting even when she couldn't. Thank you, Lena said, for not giving up on me. Caleb's expression softened. You never gave up on yourself. That's what mattered. Outside, snow began to fall again, soft and clean. Lena watched it through the cabin window and let herself believe, finally believe, that the worst was truly over, that what came next could be something worth living for. They stayed in the cabin for 3 days while the storm raged outside and the world beyond shifted on its axis. Caleb rode out each morning to check on the horses and gather news from passing travelers, returning with bread and canned goods and fragments of information. Crenshaw had been arrested. His mansion was being searched. Federal marshals were interviewing everyone who'd ever worked for him. Lena listened to each update with a strange numbness, like it was all happening to someone else. She spent her waking hours staring at the fire, wrapped in blankets, trying to reconcile 7 months of captivity with the sudden reality of freedom. Her body was free, but her mind still lived in Crenshaw's house, still flinched at footsteps, still waited for the next threat. On the second night, Caleb found her awake at 3 a.m, sitting by the dying fire. Can't sleep? He asked quietly. Lena shook her head. Every time I close my eyes, I'm back there, in that room, listening to him tell me what he'd do to Hope if I didn't cooperate. Caleb settled into the chair across from her, his face half shadowed in the firelight. He can't hurt her now. Can't hurt you either. I know that. But knowing doesn't stop the fear. Lena's voice cracked. I keep thinking, what if Mrs. Brennan hadn't been brave enough to take that journal? What if you hadn't come when you did? What if... But she was, and I did. Caleb leaned forward, his voice steady as stone. You can't live in the what-ifs, Lena. They'll eat you alive. How do you do it? The question burst out before she could stop it. How do you move past something that breaks you? Caleb was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was rough with old pain. You don't move past it. You carry it. Sarah died in my arms 3 years ago, and there's not a day I don't wake up expecting to see her beside me. Not a morning I don't brew 2 cups of coffee before I remember she's gone. He met Lena's eyes. But I get up anyway. I work the ranch. I keep breathing. Because the alternative is giving up, and Sarah would have kicked my backside for that. I'm not that strong. You escaped from Crenshaw's house in the middle of the night with his own evidence stuffed in your dress. You survived 7 months of threats and fear without breaking. You're stronger than you think. Caleb stood, adding wood to the fire. Give yourself time. The fear will fade. Not all at once, but slowly, like winter turning to spring. Lena watched sparks spiral up the chimney and wanted desperately to believe him. On the 4th day, the weather cleared enough for travel. They rode back to Canyon Bend in silence, the horses picking their way carefully through snowdrifts. Lena's heart hammered faster with each mile. Hope. She was going to see hope. After 7 months of separation, of wondering, of aching with absence, she would hold her daughter again. The sheriff's house sat on the edge of town, a modest structure with smoke curling from its chimney. Caleb tied the horses and helped Lena down, his hand steady on her elbow as they approached the door. Sheriff Bennett answered on the second knock, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a star pinned to his vest. Caleb, Miss Hart. Come in, come in. The house was warm and smelled of baking bread. A woman appeared from the kitchen, wiping flour from her hands. Mrs. Bennett, Lena assumed. She smiled when she saw them. You must be Lena. I'll fetch the baby. Baby. The word lodged in Lena's throat. Hope wasn't a newborn anymore. 7 months had passed. 7 months of growth and change that Lena had missed. Mrs. Bennett returned carrying a child who made Lena's breath catch. Hope had grown impossibly, nearly doubled in size, with wispy dark curls and eyes that were starting to shift from infant blue to something deeper. She wore a little dress that Mrs. Bennett had clearly made with care, and when she saw the strangers in the doorway, she made a sound of curiosity rather than fear. She's been an angel, Mrs. Bennett said, settling Hope into Lena's trembling arms. Good as gold, never fussed unless she was hungry or tired. Lena couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but stare at her daughter, this miraculous creature who'd survived and thrived without her. Hope studied Lena's face with serious concentration, one tiny hand reaching up to pat her mother's wet cheek. Mama's here, Lena whispered. Mama's here now. Hope babbled something incomprehensible and grabbed a fistful of Lena's hair, tugging with surprising strength. Lena laughed through her tears, and the sound felt like something breaking open inside her chest, like ice cracking after a long winter. She's beautiful, Mrs. Bennett said softly. You should be proud. I am. Lena couldn't look away from Hope. Thank you for keeping her safe, her voice broke, for everything. No thanks needed. Any woman would do the same. Mrs. Bennett exchanged a glance with her husband. Though I have to say that man Caleb, he's been here every week without fail. Bringing supplies, checking on Hope, making sure we had everything we needed. Never seen someone who wasn't blood work so hard for a child. Lena looked up to find Caleb standing awkwardly by the door, hat in hands, color rising in his weathered face. Their eyes met, and something passed between them. Something that felt too big for words. He's a good man, Lena said quietly. The best, Sheriff Bennett agreed. Speaking of which, Caleb, you'll want to hear this. Got word from the federal marshal this morning. Crenshaw's being transferred to territorial prison. He's looking at 15 to 20 years once the trial's done. And that contract he had on Miss Hart? Judge declared it void. Fraud, duress, illegal trafficking. She's free, legally and completely. The words washed over Lena like absolution. Free. Not just escaped, not just hiding, actually legally free. What about the others, she asked. The women who were at that auction. The people still trapped in contracts like mine. Bennett's expression turned grim. Marshall's investigating. Crenshaw kept records. Guess he was arrogant enough to think he'd never be caught. They've already freed a dozen people and are tracking down more. Your testimony is going to be crucial when this goes to trial. Trial. More months of reliving what happened, of facing Crenshaw across a courtroom. Lena felt exhaustion pull at her bones, but she nodded. Whatever's needed, I'll testify. Good woman, Bennett clapped Caleb on the shoulder. You two should head back before the next storm rolls in. And Miss Hart, you're welcome in Canyon Bend anytime. This town doesn't forget people who stand up for what's right. They left with Hope bundled in the warmth of Caleb's spare coat, riding slowly to accommodate the baby. Lena held her daughter against her chest, feeling the steady rhythm of Hope's heartbeat, and something settled in her soul. They'd made it. Against impossible odds, they'd survived. The rocking R came into view as the sun touched the western peaks. The ranch house had been rebuilt, not exactly as it was before, but close enough. Fresh timber glowed golden in the fading light, and smoke rose from the new chimney. It looked solid, safe, like a place where healing might be possible. It's not fancy, Caleb said as they dismounted, but it's warm and dry. You and Hope have the main bedroom. I've been sleeping in the bunkhouse since the fire anyway. Caleb, you don't have to. I want to. His voice was firm. You need space to recover, to figure out what comes next. Take all the time you need. Inside, the house smelled of fresh-cut pine and new beginnings. Someone, probably Caleb, had furnished it simply but well. A rocking chair by the fireplace, a cradle that looked hand-carved, a kitchen table scarred with use but solid. Hope squirmed in Lena's arms, making hungry sounds. Mrs. Bennett had sent along a basket of supplies, including several jars of mashed vegetables and a bottle of milk. Lena settled into the rocking chair and fed her daughter while Caleb moved around the kitchen, building a fire, heating water, doing the quiet domestic work that kept a household running. You're good at this, Lena observed. Caleb glanced over. At what? Taking care of people, creating space for them to breathe. She shifted Hope to her other arm. Did Sarah teach you that? Sarah taught me a lot of things. Patience, mostly. How to see what people need instead of what they say they need. He set a pot of coffee on to boil. She would have liked you, would have been proud of what you did. I was terrified the whole time. Brave isn't the absence of fear. It's doing what needs doing despite the fear. Caleb poured 2 cups, bringing one to Lena. You fought for your daughter, for yourself. For people you'd never even met who were trapped the same way you were. That's courage. Lena sipped the coffee and let his words settle. Hope had fallen asleep against her shoulder, milk-drunk and peaceful. The fire crackled. Outside, wind whispered through the pines. It was so quiet here, so far removed from Crenshaw's mansion with its secrets and threats. What happens now? She asked. Caleb settled into the other chair, cradling his own coffee. That's up to you. You're free. Can go anywhere, do anything. If you want to head back east, I'll stake you the money. If you want to stay in the territory, I know folks who need teachers or bookkeepers, or, he hesitated, or you can stay here as long as you want. No expectations, no obligations. Just a safe place to land while you figure things out. Why? The question came out softer than intended. Why do you keep helping me? Caleb was quiet for a long time, staring into his coffee like it held answers. When he spoke, his voice was careful. When I was 16, my father owned a plantation in Georgia, had slaves working the fields, the house, everything. I grew up thinking that was just how the world worked. Then I met a girl. He smiled faintly at the memory. She was a slave in our house, 14 years old and the smartest person I'd ever known. Could recite Shakespeare, do mathematics in her head, speak 3 languages, and she was property because my father said so. Lena waited, sensing there was more. I tried to help her, planned to buy her freedom with money I'd saved, but my father found out. Had her sold south before I could do anything. Caleb's jaw clenched. I never saw her again, never knew what happened to her, and I've carried that guilt for 20 years. The knowledge that I had the power to help, and I wasn't strong enough or smart enough or brave enough to use it. You were 16. That wasn't your fault. Maybe not, but it taught me something, that standing by while people suffer is the same as causing the suffering yourself. He looked up, meeting her eyes. So when I saw you on that auction block, bleeding and holding your baby, I couldn't walk away. Couldn't live with myself if I did nothing again. That's why I helped. Why I'll keep helping. Because maybe if I can do right by you and Hope, it balances the scales a little for the girl I failed. Lena felt tears burn her eyes. You're a better man than you give yourself credit for. I'm a man trying to be better than he was. That's all any of us can do. They sat in companionable silence as the fire burned low and Hope slept on. Outside, the first stars emerged in a sky so vast and clear it made Lena dizzy. She'd been living in small rooms for so long. First the servants' quarters, then the cabin, spaces where walls pressed close and horizons didn't exist. Out here, the world felt limitless, like anything might be possible. The first weeks back at the Rocking R passed in a blur of small routines and tentative healing. Lena woke each morning to Hope's babbling, fed and changed her daughter, then spent hours relearning how to simply be. No schedules except the ones she chose, no threats lurking around corners, just the rhythm of ranch life and the slow unfurling of something that might eventually become peace. Caleb kept his distance, true to his word. He worked from dawn to dusk on the ranch, ate the meals Lena prepared, and retreated to the bunkhouse each night. They spoke in careful pleasantries, dancing around the weight of everything unsaid. But Lena noticed the small kindnesses. Fresh wood stacked by the door each morning, a new rocking chair that appeared on the porch, the way he'd carved toys for Hope from scrap lumber during his rare idle moments. In April, the federal marshal came calling, a stern woman named Charlotte Hayes who spoke with the clipped efficiency of someone who'd seen too much corruption and had no patience left for nonsense. Miss Hart, I need your formal statement about Silas Crenshaw and your time in his employ. Hayes settled at the kitchen table with a notebook and pencil. This will take several hours. Are you prepared for that? Lena glanced at Hope, playing on a blanket near the fire. Caleb had offered to watch her during the interview, disappearing into the other room with the baby. Lena could hear him making silly sounds, Hope's delighted giggles in response. I'm ready, Lena said. Hayes nodded. Start from the beginning. The auction in Laramie. Lena told the story from start to finish, every detail she could remember, the rain-soaked platform, the men bidding on her like livestock. Caleb's intervention, the deputies who'd dragged her to Crenshaw's mansion, the contract, the threats, the midnight escape. Hayes wrote it all down in swift, precise strokes, interrupting occasionally for clarification, but mostly just listening. When Lena reached the part about Crenshaw's journal, the evidence of his crimes written in his own hand, Hayes looked up sharply. You're certain the handwriting was his? Positive. I copied his correspondence for months. I'd recognize his hand anywhere. And Mrs. Brennan delivered this journal to the territorial marshal? That's what Caleb told me. I didn't see it myself. Hayes made a note. Mrs. Brennan's testimony corroborates yours. So do the accounts from 15 former employees and the physical evidence we seized from Crenshaw's safe. The prosecution has a strong case. Will I have to testify? In court? In front of him? Yes, likely in June once the trial begins. Hayes's expression softened fractionally. I know that's difficult, but your testimony is critical. You're the only one who can speak to the full scope of his operation. The trafficking, the threats, the systematic abuse of legal contracts to enslave vulnerable people. Lena's hands trembled. The thought of facing Crenshaw again, of having him stare at her while she recounted every humiliation and horror, made her stomach turn. But she thought of the other women, the ones still trapped, the ones who died in captivity. She owed them this. I'll testify, she said firmly. Good woman. Hayes closed her notebook. One more thing. There's a significant reward being offered for evidence that led to Crenshaw's arrest. The Railroad Commission is eager to distance themselves from his fraud. They're offering $5,000 to be split among those who provided testimony and evidence. Lena blinked. $5,000 was a fortune, more money than she'd see in 10 years of teaching. Mrs. Brennan should get the majority, Lena said. She took the real risk. She's the one who got the journal to the marshal. Mrs. Brennan has been awarded $3,000. The remaining $2,000 is yours. Hayes pulled an envelope from her satchel. First installment, the rest will come after the trial concludes. The envelope was thick with bills. Lena stared at it like it might bite. That's your freedom money, Hayes said quietly. Use it to build whatever life you want. You've earned it. After Hayes left, Lena sat at the table with the envelope unopened in front of her. $2,000. Freedom money, Hayes had called it. The kind of money that could buy passage east, or a house, or a business. The kind of money that meant never being dependent on anyone's charity again. Caleb emerged from the bedroom with Hope on his hip. She's getting sleepy. Might be time for a nap. He noticed the envelope. Good news? Reward money for the evidence against Crenshaw. Lena looked up at him. $2,000. Caleb whistled low. That's a serious sum. You could do a lot with that. I could. Lena stood, taking Hope from him. Her daughter was indeed drowsy, rubbing at her eyes with tiny fists. I could leave. Start over somewhere. Crenshaw's name doesn't cast a shadow. Something flickered across Caleb's face. If that's what you want, I'll help you get settled wherever you choose. What if I don't know what I want? The words came out raw. What if I'm so tired of running and hiding and fighting that I can't see past tomorrow, let alone plan a whole future? Caleb studied her for a long moment. Then you stay. Right here. Until you can see further than tomorrow. No rush. No pressure. Just time. That's not fair to you. You didn't sign up to house 2 people indefinitely. I signed up to help you when I bought those papers in Laramie. That didn't come with an expiration date. Caleb's voice was gentle but unyielding. You're not a burden, Lena. You and Hope. You make this place feel less empty. Less like I'm just going through motions waiting to join Sarah in the ground. So if staying helps you, it helps me too. Lena felt something crack in her chest. Something that had been holding tight since the auction, since Crenshaw, since she'd learned to mistrust every kindness as a transaction. Caleb wasn't asking for anything, wasn't expecting payment or gratitude or anything except her presence. Okay, she whispered, we'll stay. For now. For now, Caleb agreed, but his smile suggested he hoped for now might stretch into something longer. Spring deepened into early summer. Lena found her rhythm on the ranch, mornings with Hope, afternoons managing the books and correspondence that Caleb had gratefully surrendered, evenings cooking meals that were slowly becoming more elaborate as she remembered recipes from her mother's kitchen. The work was simple but satisfying in ways teaching had never been. There were no demanding parents or unruly students, just the clean logic of numbers and the peaceful routine of feeding people who appreciated the effort. Hope began to crawl, then pull herself up on furniture, determined to walk despite toppling over every few steps. Lena watched her daughter's stubborn persistence and saw herself reflected there. They'd both been knocked down. They'd both gotten back up. And slowly, carefully, Lena began to let herself trust the peace she'd found. In late May, a letter arrived from Mrs. Brennan. The handwriting was the same stern script that had once assigned Lena her daily duties in Crenshaw's house. Dear Miss Hart, I hope this letter finds you well and recovering from your ordeal. I want you to know that your courage in documenting Crenshaw's crimes gave me the strength to act when the moment came. Without your evidence, I would have had nothing to give the marshal. You saved more lives than you know. The reward money has allowed me to purchase a boarding house in Boulder. I'm using it to provide safe housing for women escaping difficult situations, employment, shelter, and a chance to start over. If you ever need such a place, or know someone who does, my door is open. I'm also writing to warn you. Crenshaw has hired expensive lawyers. They're planning to paint you as a disgruntled servant seeking revenge. They'll try to discredit your testimony, question your character, make you seem unreliable. Be prepared for a fight. But know this. I'll be there in that courtroom. So will a dozen others. They can't silence all of us. Stay strong. Mrs. Eleanor Brennan. Lena read the letter twice, then tucked it away in the drawer where she kept important documents. The trial was coming, the final confrontation, and she would have to face Crenshaw one more time before this was truly over. That evening, she found Caleb mending a fence behind the barn. He looked up as she approached, wiping sweat from his brow. "You all right? You look pale." "Mrs. Brennan wrote about the trial." Lena handed him the letter. "It's going to be ugly." Caleb read quickly, his jaw tightening. "Bastard's going to try to drag you through the mud." "I expected that, but knowing it's coming doesn't make it easier." Lena sank onto a nearby stump. What if the jury believes him? What if they decide a rich railroad baron is more credible than a former slave? Then they're fools, but I don't think they will be. Caleb put down his tools and sat beside her. You've got truth on your side. Documents. Testimony from people Crenshaw can't bribe or threaten. And you've got something he doesn't. What's that? Dignity. Real dignity. Not the kind you can buy or fake. When you walk into that courtroom and tell your story, people will see exactly who you are, who he is. Truth has a way of shining through lies when you let it. Lena wanted to believe him, wanted to trust that justice would prevail, that good would triumph over evil, like in the stories she used to read to her students. But she'd learned the hard way that the world didn't work like fairy tales. Will you come with me? The question escaped before she could reconsider. To the trial. I know it's a lot to ask, but I'll be there. Caleb's answer came without hesitation. Every day, every minute, you won't face him alone. The relief was so intense, Lena felt dizzy. Thank you. No thanks needed. Caleb's hand found hers, warm and calloused and steady. We're in this together, have been since that auction yard. That doesn't change now. Lena looked down at their joined hands and felt something shift, something that had been growing quietly for months, unacknowledged but undeniable. This wasn't just gratitude, wasn't just the bond of shared struggle. It was something deeper, something that scared her more than Crenshaw ever had, because Silas Crenshaw had tried to own her body. But what she felt for Caleb Rourke could claim her heart, and that was far more dangerous. The trial was set for June 15th in the Territorial Courthouse in Denver. Lena, Caleb, and Hope made the journey by train, a luxury Lena could now afford with her reward money. They stayed in a modest hotel, and each morning Lena dressed in her best clothes, a simple gray dress that spoke of respectability without pretension, and walked into that courthouse with her spine straight and her fear locked away where it couldn't show. Crenshaw sat at the defense table looking diminished but defiant. His expensive lawyers flanked him like guard dogs, sharp-eyed and ready to attack. When Lena entered the courtroom, his gaze found hers and held it. No warmth, no recognition, just cold calculation. But Lena didn't look away. She'd learned something crucial during her months in his house. Bullies relied on fear to maintain power. Take away the fear and they were just small men with too much money and not enough soul. The prosecution called her on the second day. Lena took the stand with her hands steady on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, and told her story. Every word, every detail. The auction, the shackles, the threats against Hope, the journal documenting Crenshaw's crimes, the midnight escape. The defense attorney was a weasel-faced man named Pritchard who attacked with surgical precision. Miss Hart, isn't it true that you signed your contract willingly? I never signed anything. My father signed a document while dying, not understanding its contents. But you benefited from room, board, and employment in exchange for your labor. Hardly slavery. I benefited from not being killed for refusing. That's not a benefit. That's survival. Pritchard's smile was patronizing. You claim Mr. Crenshaw threatened your child, yet you have no proof of these alleged threats. I have his own words. His journal, which documented everything, a journal you claim to have seen but cannot produce since it was conveniently destroyed in the chaos of your escape. It wasn't destroyed. Mrs. Brennan delivered it to the marshal intact. You have it in evidence, Pritchard waved dismissively. A journal whose authenticity is disputed. Tell me, Miss Hart, is it possible you fabricated this entire story to extract revenge and money from a successful businessman? The question hung in the air like poison. Lena felt rage surge through her veins, but she forced it down, forced herself to breathe, to think. "No," she said quietly. "I didn't fabricate anything, and I don't need revenge. Mr. Crenshaw's own actions have destroyed him. I'm just here to make sure the world knows what he did, what he's still doing, and what he'll keep doing if nobody stops him." She looked directly at the jury as she spoke. 12 men and women whose faces revealed varying degrees of skepticism and sympathy. She needed them to believe her, needed them to see past Pritchard's theater to the truth underneath. "He threatened my baby," Lena said, her voice strengthening. "My newborn daughter. Said he'd claim her as his property if I didn't cooperate. What kind of man does that? What kind of man builds an empire on human suffering and calls it business?" "Objection," Pritchard shouted. "The witness is editorializing." "Overruled." The judge, a stern woman named Blackwell, fixed Pritchard with a cold stare. "The witness may continue." Lena took a breath. "I'm not asking you to feel sorry for me. I'm asking you to see what Silas Crenshaw really is. Not the rich railroad baron, not the philanthropist who donates to charities. The man who traffics in people, who uses the law as a weapon to enslave anyone he can, who threatens babies to maintain control." She looked at Crenshaw now. "I'm asking you to stop him before he hurts anyone else." The courtroom was silent. Even Pritchard seemed momentarily at a loss. Then Caleb stood in the gallery, his voice carrying clear and strong. "She's telling the truth, every word." The judge banged her gavel. "Order! The gallery will remain silent or be removed." But the moment had shifted. Lena could feel it. The jury was listening now, really listening. The trial stretched over 2 brutal weeks. Witness after witness testified to Crenshaw's crimes. Mrs. Brennan, former employees, people who'd been trapped in fraudulent contracts. Each story added another stone to the mountain of evidence. And through it all, Caleb was there. Sitting in the gallery, hope on his lap, his steady presence a reminder that Lena wasn't alone. On the final day, the jury deliberated for 6 hours before returning with their verdict: guilty on all counts. Crenshaw's face went white. His lawyers immediately began talking about appeals, but Judge Blackwell silenced them with a look. "Silas Crenshaw, you are hereby sentenced to 20 years in territorial prison for human trafficking, fraud, bribery, and conspiracy. Your assets are to be liquidated and distributed among your victims as restitution. You will never again hold power over another human being so long as you draw breath." The gavel fell like thunder. It was over. Lena walked out of that courthouse into brilliant June sunshine and felt something she hadn't experienced in over a year. Not relief, exactly. Not quite freedom. But something close to both. Justice. Caleb was waiting on the courthouse steps with hope. When he saw Lena, he smiled, a real smile, full of genuine joy. "You did it," he said. "We did it." Lena took her daughter, pressing her face into Hope's soft curls. "All of us." "What now?" Caleb asked. Lena looked at him, this good, quiet man who'd fought for her when he had no obligation, who'd kept her daughter safe, who'd stood beside her through the darkest moments of her life. She thought about the ranch, about the peace she'd found there, about mornings spent managing books, and evenings cooking dinner and nights by the fire with Hope between them, building something that looked suspiciously like a family. "Now," Lena said, "we go home." Home turned out to be exactly what Lena needed. The rocking R in high summer was a different world from the frozen landscape she'd first arrived to. Meadows, thick with wildflowers, aspen groves shimmering silver green in the breeze, mountains standing sentinel against skies so blue they hurt to look at. Hope took her first real steps on the front porch in late July, lurching from Lena's arms to Caleb's with a determination that made them both laugh and cheer. "She's got your stubbornness," Caleb observed, catching Hope before she toppled. "She's got your inability to quit," Lena countered. They'd fallen into an easy rhythm over the months since the trial. Lena managed the ranch finances and correspondence while Hope napped, then spent afternoons tending the vegetable garden that had become her pride and joy. Caleb worked the land from dawn to dusk, but his evenings were reserved for the house, helping with dinner, playing with Hope, sitting by the fire while Lena read aloud from whatever books they could get from the lending library in town. It felt like a family, looked like a family, but neither of them spoke about what it actually was, as if naming it might shatter the fragile peace they'd built. August brought news that changed everything. Lena was kneading bread dough when she heard hoofbeats approaching. She wiped flour from her hands and stepped onto the porch to find a familiar figure dismounting, Marshal Charlotte Hayes, looking dusty from hard travel. "Marshal, I wasn't expecting you." "Miss Hart." Hayes tied her horse and climbed the steps. "Is Mr. Rourke available? This concerns you both." Caleb emerged from the barn, tools in hand. "Marshal Hayes, what brings you out this way?" Hayes pulled an envelope from her satchel. "The final distribution of Crenshaw's assets has been completed. As one of his primary victims, Miss Hart, you're entitled to a substantial settlement. The Territorial Court has awarded you $15,000 in restitution." The number didn't make sense. Lena heard the words but couldn't connect them to any reality she understood. 15,000? Crenshaw's railroad holdings were worth more than anyone realized. After liquidation and distribution among all victims, your share comes to 15,000. Added to the 2,000 in reward money, you're looking at 17,000 total. Hayes handed over the envelope. "That's the bank draft. Redeemable at any territorial bank." Lena took the envelope with numb fingers. $17,000. It was more money than most people saw in a lifetime. More than enough to buy land, build a house, start a business. More than enough to secure Hope's future completely. More than enough to leave and never look back. "There's more," Hayes continued. "Several families who were displaced by Crenshaw's land fraud have filed a collective lawsuit. They're asking if you'd be willing to testify about his methods, help build their case. It wouldn't require much, maybe a day or two of depositions." "Of course," Lena said automatically. "Whatever they need." Hayes nodded. "I'll be in touch with details." "Congratulations, Miss Hart. You've earned this." She remounted and rode off, leaving Lena and Caleb standing in the yard with the envelope between them. Caleb spoke first. "That's life-changing money." "It is." Lena stared at the envelope like it might bite. "I could buy a house, start a school, give Hope everything she needs." "You could." Caleb's voice was carefully neutral. "Where would you go? Back east, maybe Denver or Boulder?" The question hung in the air. Lena could hear what he wasn't asking. "Will you leave? Will this be where we end?" She looked at the ranch house with its fresh timber and solid foundation, at the garden she'd planted, at the mountains beyond, stark and beautiful and becoming as familiar as her own heartbeat, at Caleb standing with his hat in his hands and something vulnerable in his storm-gray eyes. "I don't know," she said honestly. "I need to think." That night, Lena couldn't sleep. She paced her room while Hope slumbered peacefully in the cradle, the bank draft sitting on the dresser like an accusation. $17,000 represented freedom, choice, the ability to write her own future without depending on anyone's charity. But it also represented leaving. Walking away from the only place she'd felt safe since her parents died. Walking away from Caleb. When had that become the hardest part? She found him on the porch in the small hours before dawn, sitting on the steps with a cup of coffee going cold in his hands. He looked up when she emerged, unsurprised. "Couldn't sleep either?" he asked. "Too much thinking." Lena sat beside him, wrapping her shawl tighter against the pre-dawn chill. "You?" "Same." Caleb stared out at the dark landscape. "I've been trying to figure out how to say something without sounding like I'm trying to trap you, or obligate you, or any of the things men have been doing to you since this whole nightmare started." Lena's heart hammered. "Say it anyway." He took a breath. "Stay. Not because you owe me, or because you have nowhere else to go. Stay because you want to. Because this place, this life, it's better with you and Hope in it. Because I—" He stopped, jaw working. "Because I care about you, more than I should, probably. More than is smart, given everything you've been through, but there it is." The words settled between them like snow, soft and transformative and impossible to ignore. "Caleb, you don't have to answer now. You don't have to answer at all if you don't want to. I just needed you to know, before you made any decisions about leaving. I needed you to know that if you stay, it won't be as a guest or an employee or someone I'm helping out of obligation." He finally looked at her, and his eyes were raw with honesty. It'll be because I want you here. Because I'm hoping maybe you want to be here too. Lena felt tears burn her throat. I'm scared. Of what? Of this. Of wanting something good and having it taken away again. Of trusting that someone's kindness is real and not just a prelude to control. She wrapped her arms around herself. Crenshaw was charming at first, pleasant, offered me dignity and purpose right before he tried to own me. How do I know? She stopped, hating how broken she sounded. How do you know I'm different? Caleb finished quietly. He nodded. You don't. Not for certain. All you have is what I've shown you, what I keep showing you. And if that's not enough, I understand. He stood, setting down his coffee. I'm going to check the north fence. Take your time thinking. Whatever you decide, I'll respect it. He walked away into the pre-dawn darkness, leaving Lena alone with her fears and the question that had been growing louder for months. What did she actually want? Not what was safe, not what was practical. What did Lena Hart, former schoolteacher, former slave, survivor of auction blocks and threats and everything Silas Crenshaw had thrown at her, what did she want for her own life? The answer came as the sun broke over the mountains, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. She wanted this. The ranch. The peace. The life she'd built here. And she wanted Caleb, this good damaged man who'd given her choices instead of orders, who'd fought for her without expecting payment, who'd kept her daughter safe and asked for nothing in return. She wanted to stop running, stop surviving, start actually living. By the time Caleb returned from the fence line, Lena had made breakfast and fed Hope and dressed in her best dress, the blue one she'd bought with her first wages, simple but pretty. She met him at the door with her heart in her throat. I want to stay, she said before courage could fail her. Not as a guest, not as an employee, as whatever this is, whatever it could become. If you're willing to be patient with me, if you can accept that I'm still learning how to trust again. Caleb's expression transformed. Hope and relief and something deeper all mixed together. I can be patient, can be whatever you need me to be. I just need you to be honest, to keep being honest even when it's hard. Can you do that? Yes. No hesitation, just that simple promise. Lena stepped closer. Then I'm staying, for real this time. Not just until I figure things out. I'm staying because this is where I want to be, where Hope and I both want to be. Caleb's hand came up, hovering near her face like he wanted to touch, but wasn't sure he had permission. Lena solved the problem by closing the distance, rising on her toes to press her lips to his. The kiss was gentle, careful, full of questions and tentative answers. When they pulled apart, Caleb rested his forehead against hers. I'll spend the rest of my life earning this, he whispered, earning your trust, making sure you never regret choosing me. You've already earned it, 100 times over. Lena smiled, and it felt like the first real smile in years. Now you just have to keep showing up, keep being the man who asks instead of demands, who gives instead of takes. I can do that. Then we have a deal. They sealed it with another kiss, longer this time, while Hope babbled happily from her high chair and the morning sun poured through the windows like a blessing. The wedding happened in September, when the aspens turned gold and the air carried the first hints of coming winter. It was a simple affair in the wildflower meadow behind the ranch house. Just a few friends from town, Sheriff Bennett and his wife, Marshall Hayes, who'd become something of a friend, and Mrs. Brennan, who traveled from Boulder specifically for the occasion. Lena wore a dress she'd sewn herself from fabric Caleb had bought in Denver, cream-colored cotton with lace at the collar and cuffs. Nothing fancy, but it was hers, chosen freely, worn freely, a symbol of a choice she'd made rather than a cage someone else had locked her in. Hope served as flower girl, though at 14 months old, her idea of scattering petals involved mostly eating them and throwing handfuls at anyone within reach. The guests laughed, and Lena felt her heart swell with a happiness so fierce it was almost painful. The circuit judge, a kind-faced man named Morrison, who'd heard about Lena's case and volunteered his services, kept the ceremony brief. Caleb Rourke, do you take this woman to be your wife, to honor and cherish, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health? as long as you both shall live." "I do." Caleb's voice was steady, his eyes locked on Lena's. "Lena Hart, do you take this man to be your husband? To honor and cherish, in plenty and in want, in sickness and in health, as long as you both shall live?" Lena thought about everything that had brought her to this moment: the auction block, the chains, the threats, the fear, and then the slow, painful climb toward something better, toward choice, toward a life built on trust instead of terror. "I do," she said clearly. "Then by the power vested in me by the territory of Wyoming, I pronounce you husband and wife. You may kiss your bride." Caleb did thoroughly, while their friends cheered and Hope shrieked with delight. When they pulled apart, both were grinning like fools. The celebration lasted into the evening, dancing to fiddle music, eating Mrs. Bennett's incredible cake, toasting with cider since Lena had never acquired a taste for anything stronger. As the sun set and the first stars emerged, Lena found herself standing at the edge of the gathering with Mrs. Brennan. "You look happy," the older woman observed. "I am. Surprisingly, terrifyingly happy." Lena glanced at her former keeper. "Thank you. For everything you did. For having the courage to act when it mattered most." Mrs. Brennan's expression softened. "You were the one with courage. I just finally found my spine after years of looking the other way." "You inspired that." She paused. "The boarding house is doing well. We've helped 17 women so far, given them jobs, safety, a chance to start over. I thought you should know, your fight didn't just free you. It freed all of them, too." Lena felt tears prick her eyes. "I'm glad. Nobody should have to endure what we did." "No. But because we did, and because we survived it, we can help others survive, too. That's worth something." Mrs. Brennan squeezed her hand. "Be happy, Lena. You've earned it 1,000 times over." As the guests began to depart and the celebration wound down, Caleb found Lena standing in the meadow, looking up at the stars. Hope was asleep on his shoulder, exhausted from the excitement. "Ready to go home?" he asked. Lena looked at him, her husband now, legally and truly, and felt something settle deep in her bones. "I'm already home." The years that followed were not without challenges. There were nightmares that woke Lena gasping, convinced she was back in Crenshaw's house. There were days when trust felt impossible, and she pushed Caleb away because letting him close felt too dangerous. There were moments when the weight of what she'd survived threatened to crush her, but Caleb kept his promise. He showed up, every day, every moment, with patience and honesty and a love that asked for nothing except her presence. Slowly, painfully, Lena learned to accept that not all kindness came with strings attached, that not all men who said they cared were lying. Hope grew into a fierce, brilliant child who asked endless questions and feared nothing. Lena taught her to read at 4, and by 6 she was devouring every book they could find. She had Lena's stubborn determination and Caleb's quiet strength, and watching her daughter become her own person was a joy Lena had never anticipated. In 1876, when Hope was 7, Lena gave birth to a son. They named him Samuel, after Caleb's grandfather, and he came into the world with lungs that could wake the dead and fists that swung at shadows. Caleb cried when he first held his son, tears running into his beard, and Lena understood. This was the family he'd lost when Sarah died, the second chance he'd never thought he'd have. As the children grew, Lena threw herself into causes that mattered. She testified in 3 more trials involving human trafficking, helped Mrs. Brennan expand her boarding house into a full network across the territory, and eventually opened a school in Canyon Bend for children whose families couldn't afford the established institutions. She taught reading, writing, mathematics, and most importantly, that every person had value regardless of their circumstances. Some of her students were the children of former slaves, some were orphans. Some came from families so poor that education seemed like an impossible luxury. Lena taught them all with the same fierce dedication because she remembered what it felt like to have your worth measured by others, to be told you were property, not a person. Her students would never forget their value if she had anything to say about it. Hope, growing into a young woman of remarkable intelligence and fire, became Lena's teaching assistant at 15. She had dreams of becoming a lawyer. "Someone needs to fight for people the way Marshall Hayes fought for you," she'd said with typical determination, and Lena had no doubt she'd achieve it. Samuel took after his father, more interested in working with his hands than books. He learned ranching from Caleb, and by 12 could rope and ride better than most grown men. But he also inherited Lena's sense of justice, and more than once came home bruised from defending smaller kids against bullies. "You can't solve everything with your fists," Lena told him after one particularly ugly fight. "I know, Ma, but sometimes people need to see you're willing to fight before they'll listen to your words." Samuel's jaw set stubbornly. "You taught me that. You fought Crenshaw with evidence and testimony, but you were willing to fight other ways too when you had to." Lena couldn't argue with that. The ranch prospered. Caleb expanded gradually, never overreaching, always sustainable. He hired workers at fair wages and treated them with dignity, and word spread. The Rocking R became known as a place where people were valued, where hard work was rewarded, where nobody was considered property or lesser than. In 1885, news came that Silas Crenshaw had died in prison. Lena received the notice from Marshal Hayes, now retired but still keeping tabs on old cases, and felt nothing. Not relief, not satisfaction, just a distant acknowledgement that a chapter had finally, truly closed. "How do you feel?" Caleb asked that evening. Lena considered. "Like he's not worth feeling anything about. He was just a small, cruel man who happened to have money. He tried to break me and failed. That's all that matters." "He didn't just fail. You destroyed his entire empire, freed dozens of people, changed laws that protected men like him. I'd say you did more than survive." Lena smiled. "We survived. All of us together. That's the important part." As the century turned toward its final decades, Lena watched the world change around her. Wyoming granted women the right to vote in 1869, and Lena exercised that right religiously, teaching her daughter that the ability to choose your leaders was a sacred responsibility. The frontier began to settle, towns growing into cities, wilderness yielding to civilization for better and worse. But the Rocking R remained a constant, a place of peace and purpose and family. Hope graduated from law school in 1890, one of only a handful of women to do so, and immediately began taking cases that nobody else wanted, defending the poor, the marginalized, the people society had written off. She built her practice in Denver, but came home often, bringing stories of victories and defeats, and always, always fighting. "I learned from the best," she told Lena during one visit. "You showed me that one person standing up for what's right can change everything. I'm just following your example." Samuel married a rancher's daughter from Montana and took over more of the day-to-day operations of the Rocking R, allowing Caleb to finally slow down. They had 3 children in quick succession, and the house that had once felt too empty now rang with the chaos of grandchildren. Lena, watching her grandchildren play in the same meadow where she'd married Caleb, felt a contentment so deep it was almost overwhelming. This was the life she'd built from the ashes of the auction block. These children, this family, this legacy of love and justice, and stubborn refusal to accept the world's cruelty. This was what she'd fought for. Caleb found her on the porch one evening in the spring of 1898, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of fire and gold. He moved slower these days, his joints stiff with age and old injuries, but his eyes were still the same storm gray that had locked onto hers in that rain-soaked auction yard 3 decades ago. "What are you thinking about?" he asked, settling into the rocking chair beside hers. "Everything. Nothing. How strange it is that the worst day of my life led to all of this." Lena gestured at the ranch, at the distant sound of grandchildren laughing. "If you hadn't been at that auction, if you hadn't bid, if you hadn't been exactly who you are, none of this exists. If you hadn't been strong enough to survive, brave enough to fight, smart enough to document everything Crenshaw did, none of this exists either." Caleb took her hand, his grip still firm despite the tremor of age. "We built this together. That's what matters." "We did, didn't we?" Lena smiled. "Built something worth having. The best thing I ever did was buy those papers in Laramie. Not because I saved you. You saved yourself. But because it meant I got to be part of your life. Got to watch you become who you were always meant to be." Lena leaned over to kiss him, soft and sweet. "I love you. In case I don't say it enough. You say it plenty, but I'll never get tired of hearing it. Caleb squeezed her hand. I love you too. More than I thought I could love anyone after Sarah. You gave me a second chance at living instead of just surviving. They sat in comfortable silence as the sky darkened and the first stars emerged. Inside, they could hear Hope helping with dinner, Samuel's deep laugh, the children's excited chatter, the sounds of family, of home. Lena thought about the girl she'd been at 22, desperate, terrified, chained on an auction platform with a newborn in her arms. That girl had thought her life was over, had believed there was no future except whatever nightmare the highest bidder could devise. She'd been wrong, so beautifully, wonderfully wrong, because the truth was that her life hadn't ended on that platform. It had begun. Everything that came before, her parents' deaths, the debts, the contract her father signed, all of it had been prologue to this. To the families she'd built, to the lives she'd changed, to the legacy she'd leave behind. The auction block hadn't destroyed her. It had forged her into something stronger than she'd ever imagined possible. Caleb passed away in his sleep in the winter of 1902, with Lena's hand in his and his children and grandchildren surrounding the bed. He went peacefully, without pain, and Lena grieved him with the depth of someone who'd truly been loved. But she didn't break, didn't crumble. Because Caleb had spent 3 decades showing her that she was strong enough to stand on her own. She lived on for another 15 years, watching her grandchildren grow into remarkable adults, watching Hope become one of the most respected lawyers in the territory, watching the world continue to change and evolve. She kept teaching until her body simply wouldn't allow it anymore. And even then, she tutored individual students from her porch, sharing knowledge and wisdom with anyone who would listen. On a clear September morning in 1917, Lena Hart Rourke passed away surrounded by 3 generations of family. She was 83 years old, and she had lived to see women gain the right to vote across multiple states, had seen her daughter argue cases before the Supreme Court, had seen her grandchildren become teachers and ranchers and builders who carried forward the values she'd instilled. Her funeral was attended by over 200 people, former students, families she'd helped, women who'd found shelter in Mrs. Brennan's boarding houses, people whose lives had been touched by her testimony against Crenshaw. They came to honor a woman who'd been sold on an auction block and had transformed that degradation into a lifetime of dignity and purpose. Hope gave the eulogy, standing straight and strong despite her tears. My mother taught me that the measure of a person isn't where they start, but what they do with the journey. She started in chains. She ended surrounded by love. She spent her life making sure that others could make the same journey, from darkness to light, from property to person, from survival to thriving. Hope's voice strengthened. She was never a victim. She was a fighter, a teacher, a mother, a force of nature who refused to let the world's cruelty define her. And her legacy isn't just in this family. It's in every person she helped, every student she taught, every life she changed by simply refusing to give up. They buried her next to Caleb on a hillside overlooking the ranch, where wildflowers grew thick in summer and the mountains stood eternal against the sky. The headstone was simple: Lena Hart Rourke, 1834 to 1917. Teacher, mother, warrior. She chose freedom. Years later, Hope's daughter, Lena's granddaughter, also named Lena, would write a book about her grandmother's life. It would become required reading in schools across the West, a testament to one woman's refusal to be broken. The Rocking R would become a historical site, preserved as a place where healing and justice had taken root. But the real legacy wasn't in books or monuments. It was in the lives that continued forward. In great-grandchildren who became judges and activists and teachers. In a family that understood that strength came from surviving hardship without becoming hardened. In the knowledge that one person, standing up at the right moment, could change everything. Lena Hart had been dragged onto an auction block in the rain, bleeding and terrified and holding a newborn who seemed destined for the same fate. The men below had seen merchandise, property to be bought and sold. They'd been fools. What they'd actually seen, what none of them recognized, was a woman who would survive, who would fight, who would transform her own suffering into a crusade for justice that would echo across generations. The auction hadn't been her ending, it had been her beginning, and the life she built after, full of love and purpose and stubborn, beautiful defiance, that was the story worth remembering. Not the chains, but what came after. Not the platform where she was sold, but the ranch where she chose to stay. Not the man who bought her papers, but the man she chose to marry. Not the victim she could have remained, but the warrior she became. That was Lena's legacy. That was the story that mattered. And in the wildflower meadow where she'd married Caleb all those years ago, where her grandchildren's grandchildren would someday play, that legacy lived on, forever.